Hey everybody, and welcome back to another compilation style video. Today's concept is going to be on the dumbest plays we saw throughout all of 2025. Now, being as this is previously released content, there will be some things that may sound a little out of context or perhaps out of date, but I do think the content itself exists in a relative vacuum, so it shouldn't impede the viewer experience all that much. With that being said, I hope you guys enjoy, and I'm looking so forward to 2026 getting started.
So far in 2025, we've seen a number of errors. This is normal, right? Including some that guys probably aren't going to be making 2 to 3 months from now as they settle into their routines and knock the rust off a bit. That's not saying that these haven't been consequential, some of them have been, but again, they're to be expected. But what certainly isn't predictable at any time of the year are brain freezes. Plays so hard to decipher that they hurt your head to watch. And that's exactly what we saw yesterday in the Tigers-Mariners game, and it cost one team dearly by the end of the contest. Facing 9-hole hitter J.P. Crawford, Detroit ace Terry Skubal managed to induce a weak ground ball to the right side on a sinker, where Colt Keith, his second baseman, inexplicably spun to throw to second with 2 outs before having to throw it to first, resulting in it being laid and Crawford reaching. Just watch that play again. It's hard to even break down. Did he not know there were 2 outs? Why didn't he just throw it to second when he seemed like he was posturing to do so and he still had a little time? Furthermore, why did he spin on that play when normally you'll see a guy just grab it and throw statically? Just completely mind-boggling. And perhaps what's worse is that literally on the next pitch, Victor Robles would crush a hanging changeup with the ball just eluding the leaping effort of the center fielder, resulting in a 2-run double. It would take Skubal an additional 7 pitches after this to get out of the frame, taxing the lefty en route to him only being able to throw 5 2/3 innings. And even though Detroit was able to rally back to score 2 runs a couple frames later, the Seattle bullpen and Luis Castillo would combine to close things down, despite a somewhat tumultuous 9th inning. This means those 2 runs, which were somehow earned by the way because this play was considered a single, ended up being the difference between a Tigers win and a tough loss, which could end up being consequential by season's end if the AL Central stays as congested as we think it may be, given the semi-equal level of talent across the top 4 teams in the division. Ronald Acuna Jr. came back yesterday in one of the more electric returns we've seen in recent memory, crushing a 467-foot moonshot on the first pitch in his first AB, before adding a 108-mile-per-hour single later and one of the best throws of the season from the right field corner to nab Elias Diaz trying for second. But unfortunately for him, pretty much no one else offensively showed up, resulting in the game being tied 1-1 going into the 9th, when Manny Machado crushed this go-ahead homer to put the Padres up 2-1. But all of this was simply an appetizer for what would happen in the bottom of that inning, when Eli White managed to make a mind-numbingly dumb base running play that I don't believe I've ever seen anything quite like before. But first, let's examine how he got there. Alex Verdugo would lead off versus Robert Suarez, grounding a 3-1 fastball just past the sliding glove of Xander Bogaerts, giving the Braves a leadoff base runner. Our titular character Eli would then enter the game as a pinch runner. Sean Murphy would follow this with what amounted to essentially a swinging bunt down the third base line that had some crazy English on it, spinning fair at the last second before being fielded by Elias Diaz, who made a ridiculously good spinning play to nab the Braves' backstop by an inch. Still, a runner was now on second with 1 out, with Ozzie Albies coming to the dish, and the now veteran second baseman would not disappoint, lining a changeup in his center field, which Merrill got to fairly quickly. Runners on first and third and 1 out, right? Wrong. For some inconceivable reason, White seemed to believe that the ball was caught, which had him racing back towards second, resulting in him getting easily tagged out. Just look at this. I can't remember a time I've ever seen on a major league, minor league, or even little league field a runner believe that the ball was caught when it actually had landed, get all the way to third base, and then run back to second before getting tagged out on what wasn't even a force play. Now, the first question that pops to my mind was, what the hell was third base coach Matt Tuiasosopo doing? But as we can see from this angle, he was behaving completely normally, giving the hold-up sign as White approached third base. However, it seems that Eli misinterpreted the universal 2 hands up sign for a hold as Matt somehow saying the ball was caught and that he had to get back. Just look at Tuiasosopo's body language here. He had no idea what was going on. And as you might expect, this ended up being a game-losing blunder after Michael Harris II grounded out to short, sealing one of the most bizarre losses we've seen yet this year, on one of the most uniquely stupid plays I've ever seen on an MLB field. Good for the Padres, they broke their losing streak, but I have to say it does suck to me that the heroic efforts of the returning Acuna ended up being completely wasted. The White Sox may not be the worst team in MLB this season like they were last year, but honestly, that has more to do with the fact that the Colorado Rockies are playing like a AA team most nights than them doing anything impressive, as they currently are 30 games under 500 as of recording. And yesterday served as a prime example of one of the major reasons they've struggled so badly. Some truly horrible fundamentals at times, which their opponent, the Cubs, took advantage of with their own advanced baseball IQs. There were two major examples of this I'm going to look at, with the first one coming in the third inning with 1 out and 2 guys on, when Chase Mydroth popped a ball in the infield, an easy play for Nico Horner. But the second baseman decided to try his luck at allowing the ball to drop, being as how the infield fly rule was in effect, and see if anybody would take the bait. And it worked to perfection, with Lennon Sosa racing to third with what I'm assuming was a misunderstanding of how this play is supposed to work. Obviously, as soon as the fly rule is called, the batter's out anyway, so there was no pressure for Sosa to go, and with their 3-hitter now coming up with 2 outs, it made 0 sense otherwise to try to advance. We flash forward now to the 8th inning, when the Cubs were hitting with 2 guys on, and now a 4-1 lead. Matt Shaw took a fastball offside, with catcher Edgar Caro picking it first. After a bit of back and forth, lead runner Ian Happ attempted to score around third, with the White Sox noticing and chasing him back towards the bag. But as Caro flipped to third baseman Colson Montgomery, the rookie got in the way of Ian, who did what any good base runner should do in that circumstance: steamroll him, not only causing the ball to go off his mitt, but drawing an interference call in the process. You see, obviously, you can't block the baseline when you don't have the ball, as Colson did here. Again, sloppy, fundamentally unsound baseball, as well as some decently savvy actions from Happ to draw the call. The score, as such, was pushed to 5-1, which would end up being highly consequential when Andrew Benintendi crushed his second home run of the game soon after, closing the lead to 5-4. If either of the plays I detailed hadn't happened, this could have turned the entire game on its head, but instead, the White Sox would indeed go on to lose after Lennon Sosa grounded out to shortstop to end it. A couple days back, I made a video on a legitimately historic walk-off when Ceddanne Rafaela of the Boston Red Sox hit the cheapest walk-off home run in recorded MLB history, with it traveling just 308 feet, nearly 25 feet shallower than the next closest. Yet, even though I would consider this a weird moment because of its singularity, I don't think it quite approaches the bizarre nature of the walk-off we just saw yesterday, when the Rays won on a play I don't believe I've ever seen before on a major league field. Facing the Rangers, Tampa found themselves trailing 3-1 in the bottom of the 9th, due in large part to the contributions of Marcus Semien, who's been cold as the Arctic all year at the dish, but on this night managed to hit 2 solo home runs. In this frame, things would not begin well for them, as Brandon Lowe would ground out to Corey Seager off lefty Robert Garcia. Next up was Yandy Diaz, who, somewhat predictably, if you watch my video on him that came out in recent weeks, hit the ball on the ground, hard, seeing it skip into left field. Jonathan Aranda would then walk on 4 pitches, including a final one that nearly clipped him to put 2 guys on. This brought Junior Caminero into the batter's box, who would somehow manage to crush this fastball above the zone on the ground into center field, making the score 3-2. A little bit of water was then splashed onto the growing fire when Jake Mangum softly flied this ball to right field, bringing the Rangers within 1 out of closing this one down. And the game could have ended on the next batter when Christopher Morel crushed this ball down the third baseline, fielded nicely by Josh Young to keep it from going into the left field corner, but a moment of indecision on where to throw it ended up costing him a chance to get Christopher at first. Bases loaded, 2 outs. This brings us to our bizarre play, as on a 1-2 pitch, Taylor Walls would ground this ball to second base, one of the more routine plays you're ever going to see on a major league field. But the inexperience of first baseman Josh Smith seemed to prompt the infielder to try to make this play, drawing him so far away from the bag that Marcus had no one to throw to. Still, at this point, it wasn't that crazy of a play, but what followed certainly was, when Semien, with a play unfolding in front of him, held onto the ball for way too long as Caminero raced around third, managing to slide in just ahead of the throw from Marcus. Look at that again. I can't remember the last time I saw a walk-off 2-run infield single on a routine ground ball to the second baseman. And yes, it was indeed called a single. What a brutal end to a game the Rangers desperately needed, as they looked to try to keep pace in a crowded AL West, with this loss dropping them to 5 games under 500. The Blue Jays have been on a bit of a run recently, going 5-1 over the last 6 contests to help them get a few games over the 500 mark, and leapfrog their way all the way into second place in the AL East. But they came somewhat close to putting a little cold water on their streak today when they trailed the A's into the 8th inning. And it was partially because of one of the funnier looking base running brain cramps we've seen yet this season. When George Springer got so excited upon getting to third base, he literally jumped off the bag. Facing JP Sears in the bottom of the 5th inning, Springer lined a 2-out RBI single just over the head of shortstop Jacob Wilson into left field, getting Toronto on the board while keeping 2 guys on, after Vladdy Jr. barely got back to second. This brought catcher Alejandro Kirk to the plate, who then crushed his own heater down the left field line, fielded by Drew Evans, who got the ball in quickly to Max Schumann, with the shortstop putting what seemed to be at the time a meaningless tag on Springer, who had gotten to third. But the A's saw something they thought was worth challenging, and upon replay review it would be revealed that George indeed was hopping up and down off the bag, providing a small window for Schumann to successfully nab him. The play was eventually overturned, ending the frame in one of the goofier ways possible. Thankfully for Toronto, this wouldn't end up coming back to bite them in the long run, as Addison Barger would crush a go-ahead 3-run home run in the bottom of the 8th, before Nathan Lucas and Vlad would add some insurance runs later on in the frame. 1 inning later, and Jeff Hoffman had induced a pop-up off the bat of Ramon Urias, bringing the Blue Jays record to 6-1 over the last 7 games while saddling the Athletics with their 17th loss in their last 18 games. Still, even with the win, I did think it was worth looking at this Springer moment, because I think this might be the first time I've ever seen a player get tagged out because they were jumping up and down on a major league base. It's not all too uncommon for guys to forget how many outs there are, and honestly, while it looks a little goofy, it's at least understandable. You're out there in the field for a long time, batters coming and going, and sometimes you can get a little absent-minded. It's not pretty, but it is human nature. But what if I were to tell you that a pitcher for the Marlins just did this exact thing, but after the first out of an inning? That is exactly what happened during a recent game versus the Nationals. Miami was going with a bullpen game on this day, with lefty Cade Gibson managing to face the minimum in the first after getting a double play and a flyout, following a leadoff single. Then, after a scoreless inning on the hitting side, he would walk Nathaniel Lowe to lead off the second, which would be where his day would end, with the Marlins turning to righty Ronnie Enriquez to face Alex Call, who promptly grounded a sweeper back to the mound that Enriquez almost made a behind-the-back play on, before seeing it ricochet off his mitt. It was here that, with a 2-2 count on Josh Bell, he would flip a nasty slider at the bottom rail, followed by Ronnie, for some reason, starting to head towards the dugout as if the inning was over, despite there being only one out. Just listen to the announcer's reactions after this play.
Have you ever seen a one-out strikeout and the guy walk off the field like there's 3 outs? I've never seen that. Watch Enriquez after he throws his nasty slider. Walking off, 3 out.
He's locked in.
It's the first out.
It's the first out.
Not even the second.
For baseball lifers to say they've never seen that before, it's gotta be truly bizarre, which I definitely think it was. He would follow this by getting another ground ball back to the mound, this time that he successfully fielded before taking it himself to the bag. This is where the good vibes would end, as he would walk back-to-back hitters to force in the game's first run before departing, giving way to lefty Anthony Veneziano, who managed to strike out CJ Abrams to get out of trouble. The Marlins would eventually win this hotly contested game 4-3, with Calvin Foucher managing to get James Wood to pop up with the bases loaded and 2 outs in the 9th. Still, when looking back at this contest, I can say that, at least for me, the major play of note will be this epic brain fart from Enriquez, which I'm confident in saying I don't think we've ever seen on a major league field before.
Cross-ups are an unfortunate thing that used to be a relatively common problem in Major League Baseball. Every couple games, there would be a misunderstanding that would involve the pitcher and catcher not being on the same page with a certain pitch type being delivered. But this has largely gone the way of the dinosaur after the introduction of PitchCom, as these two parties now communicate directly, making it hard to cross up anyone. But we not only just saw one of these nearly extinct instances, but it seems it may have been done intentionally as a means of a hurler getting revenge on his game caller. Framber Valdez was on the mound in a 2-0 game, with the bases loaded and 1 out, and on a 2-2 to Giancarlo Stanton. He would punch out the righty on a racing changeup or sinker, I'm not exactly sure which, putting him 1 out away from getting out of trouble entirely. But it was then on a 1-0 to a player that's been clutch all year, Trent Grisham, that Valdez grooved a fastball right down the middle, seeing it crushed out to left field into the Crawford boxes, extending New York's lead to a much safer 6-0. That was Grisham's 3rd Grand Slam of the year so far, by the way. Now, on the surface, this seems like a pretty routine sequence, right? A pitcher just missed with his spot. But if you go back to the Houston broadcast, you can see his catcher, Cesar Salazar, telling him to step off before he even delivered the offering. Yet the lefty just went ahead and did so, and paid the ultimate price. This is obviously a stubborn move on his part, but if this is where things ended, nobody would be talking about it. But, you see, just 1 pitch later, we would see Salazar get handcuffed by a 93-mile-per-hour sinker right down the middle of the plate, with the catcher's immediate reaction being a stare out to the mound, which prompted Valdez to turn with an exasperated look on his face and walk behind the mound. Look at Caesar's reaction as he goes to deliver a new ball to the hurler. It certainly seems to me like he was peeved. And it's not like Framber was apologetic either, never even approaching his catcher to check if he was okay. And in case you might think this is a little soft of a request, consider what former professional catcher and current quality content maker Eric Sim had to say, being, quote, "If he did this on purpose after the catcher told him to step off, but instead refusing, then giving up a grand slam, F him. Especially when off-speed is called and throwing a sinker. I had a torn ligament on my thumb from one of those and was out for a year. Especially when you have the kind of movement Framber does, you absolutely cannot be doing things like this in any circumstance. Period. True psycho behavior." And of course, he would claim after the game that it wasn't intentional because, what was he supposed to say? I had an outburst and hit my catcher with a pitch intentionally? Of course not, but just based on his body language and pretty much every pundit's response to this, including former Major League player Dallas Braden, who believed it was 100% intentional, I think it's pretty safe to say it was so. This is going to go down as one of the all-time scummy teammate moves we have on video. And yeah, it's hard not to see it affecting his incoming free agency in one way or another. The Yankees would go on to close this one out by a final score of 7-1, saddling Valdez with a well-deserved loss as New York proceeded to overtake the Astros in record. Which means with the hard-charging Red Sox right behind them, if Houston doesn't manage to secure their tentative lead on their division, they could very well end up not making the playoffs at all.
The Phillies over the last couple of years in the playoffs have become known for one principal thing: the core of their team disappearing when they're needed most, leading to last season's loss to the Mets and this year's poor opening effort versus LA. And this motif was present yet again decidedly in Game 2, which they would eventually drop as well, with Turner, Schwarber, and Harper going a combined 1 for 10 with a single RBI and striking out 5 times. But even in a game that featured this kind of production from their big guys, they still had a chance to come back and at least tie things in the bottom of the ninth. It was at that time, however, that they decided to put on one of the dumbest plays you'll ever see on a major league field, and not for the reasons necessarily that you would think. Seriously, Philly fans, for those of you tuning in, I'm not just going to simply criticize the bunt call. There's much more to it than that. But before we get there, we have to look at the game as a whole. Last night's villain and then hero, Teoscar Hernandez, registered our first real notable play in the 4th inning, when, after 3 scoreless frames, mostly filled with domination by the day's 2 starting pitchers, Jesus Luzardo and Blake Snell, Teo tapped a ball back to the mound, and then just started jogging out of the box. Meaning that, despite Jesus bobbling the ball and then having it go off him towards third base, he was still able to get the veteran outfielder by plenty at first, flashing a big smile afterward. Both pitchers would then continue to carve up the opposing lineup for the next 2 frames. This would be where Philadelphia would put up their first real threat at the ballgame, with Trey Turner drawing a full count walk, and then stealing second in front of a Schwarber base on balls. This brought Bryce Harper to the dish, looking for a signature moment that would never come, as he struck out on a nasty, well-placed slider, leaving it all up to Alec Boehm, who on a 2-0 would swing at a pitcher's pitch, grounding routine ball to third base, with the play probably being a little closer than it needed to be since Miguel Rojas decided to race Turner, one of the fastest runners in the game, to the bag, making the play with a dive instead of a simple throw across the diamond. Still, he was out, taking us to the top of the 7th, when Hernandez impacted the contest again, this time in a positive capacity for his team by leading off with a single to center field, racing to third on the ensuing double off the bat of Freddie Freeman. This signaled the end of Luzardo's night, giving way to righty Orion Kirkring, who made his manager look smart at first with a strikeout on a near 100-mile-per-hour heater to Tommy Edman. This brought perennial playoff hero Kike Hernandez to the plate, who wouldn't manage to get off a big swing here, instead sending a little ground ball to shortstop Trey Turner, who made a slightly offline throw to the plate, allowing Hernandez, who actually has some pretty sneaky good speed, to slide in safely with the game's first run. But this wouldn't be where things would end, as with 2 outs and the bases now juiced, it was Will Smith's turn to come through, this time on a dying duck line drive to left field, scoring 2 more. Shohei would then follow with an RBI single of his own on a hard-hit line drive off of Nicolas Cage. Comment below if you get that reference, before Mookie Betts finally ended the frame on a fly ball to center field. Based on how things had been for the Philly offense at this point, the game seemed pretty much over, right? Well, not so fast. Max Kepler would lace a 1-out triple in the 8th to give them some degree of life, allowing Turner to score his teammate easily on a sharp single to center field. And with the middle of their order coming up yet again, this seemed like the perfect time to get something else going. But, like I mentioned in the intro, the disappearing act for Schwarber and Harper would continue, with Schwarb's K-ing and Bryce flying out. This takes us to the bottom of the 9th, where, down 3, hope was dwindling fast. Again though, they wouldn't just go peacefully into the night, getting 3 hits off of veteran Blake Trinan, with the last one being a 2 RBI hustle double that Nick Castellanos somehow managed to make contact with despite it being like a foot off the plate. This put the tying run on second, with nobody out. The Dodgers then brought in lefty Alex Vesia to face Bryson Stott, who would be attempting to, at a minimum, get the runner over to third. It was at this point disaster would strike for the city of brotherly love, as though he laid down what should have been a perfect bunt. The Dodgers had the wheel play on, allowing them to make a relatively routine out at third base, with Nick Castellanos sliding into the tag. Now, like I alluded to earlier, the stupidity in this play is not, in my opinion, the bunt itself. With Harrison Bader on deck, who would eventually line a single, moving Casty up to third while giving up an out wasn't a horrible idea to me. No, the dumb asteroid would come in 2 layers. First being the fact that the Phillies had to have known the wheel play was going to be on because Stott had already taken a pitch high, which allowed them to see all of LA's fielders move in this respect, meaning there was absolutely zero reason to keep the bunt play on as they were planning it. At a minimum, they needed to ask him to try to bring it with him towards second base or deaden it right in front of the plate, not push it to third, or just cancel it entirely and try to slap the ball through what was essentially a completely vacated middle of the field. But instead of any of that, they just proceeded as if they saw nothing. And then, to make matters worse, in an excellent segment that was pointed out specifically by Jimmy Rollins himself, Nick didn't even get a running lead off of second base despite the fact that there was nobody holding him on. as, again, on the wheel play, pretty much every infielder's out of the middle of the field, meaning that there's no reason not to get as big of a lead as humanly possible. Those are two mind-numbingly dumb aspects of this moment that contributed to it not working, and as you'd expect, it doomed the overall game entirely, as despite Bader's efforts, after a Max Kepler ground ball put them down to their final out, Roki Sasaki would come to the mound, managing to retire Trey Turner in one final big spot, despite the fact that Tommy Edman almost yipped this game away with a bad throw that was picked nicely by Freddie Freeman at first. All of this put Philadelphia just one game away from being bounced in the playoffs yet again. And with an aging roster and number of impending free agents, their fans, front office, and team themselves must be feeling their collars starting to tighten a bit. Alright everybody, if you made it this far, I appreciate you watching, and if you did, consider checking out any of these other videos on your screen right now for other content just like this. Also, if you ever see anything you'd like to see me detail in the video, feel free to reach out to my email, basebpoet@gmail.com, and if I end up using your idea, I'll give you a shout out. Thanks for watching, have a great rest of your day.